So there has been a lot of talk about the P320 lately and how it may or may not be going off on its own. And I'm going to break this down very simply so all you guys can understand what's going on with this gun. We have a small array of firearms, all from different manufacturers, and then the P320 on the end. That's actually an X10 variant. And I'm going to show you right now why this gun is going off all on its own way more often than we've heard of any other guns doing it. So here we have an example of a 1911. This is a miniaturized 1911. But if I do this, nothing happens. Here is a Walther PDP. Very cool gun, very popular. And if I do this, nothing happens. Here's a Smith & Wesson M&P Carry Comp. I do this, nothing happens. Here is the X10. We don't hear about the X10 specifically very often because not a ton of people shoot 10mm because they're all babies and they prefer to shoot 9mm instead. This is a big, scary man's round. But this has the exact same workings of a regular P320, it's just a little bit larger. And when you do this, goes off. That is why the P320 is going off all on its own. It is, as far as all investigations are concerned, not a physical defect of the gun. They have found that the striker safety inside of here, inside the striker assembly right there, can deactivate under certain stressors. However, in order for this gun to fire, two things need to happen. There is a striker inside here, and then there is a sear directly linked to the trigger shoe. The sear has to disengage from the striker in order for the striker to be released and for the striker safety functionality to be relevant. This gun could have no striker safety at all in any way, shape, or form and still never go off on its own unless the sear fails. That's what the striker safety is for. It is in case the sear fails. The P320, to this date, has no documented, proven evidence that this sear can fail. The only thing that people have found is that the striker safety can fail. There is zero proof, actual proof, that this gun has ever fired without the trigger being pulled. And that's why I just demonstrated what I demonstrated. This trigger can be accidentally pulled much easier than this can, and especially this can. This has a manual safety so that this trigger cannot be pulled no matter how deep something gets in there and tries to pull the trigger. And every single other striker-fired gun, I just put two of these here, but every other striker-fired gun has a system where there is a trigger shoe safety. That is a trigger shoe safety right there. This is depressed, and then it can allow the trigger to be pulled. But if this is not depressed, then the trigger can't go back. And it's simply that little mechanism right there. It's a very, very, very simple piece of plastic that hits the frame and moves out of the way of the frame when pressure is put on this pivot point. The M&P, they used to have a hinged trigger shoe safety where the entire bottom of the trigger shoe was this hinge and there was not a center blade, and they changed that because it was not as safe as the center mounted blade, because then you could do what I just did with this. You could just hit the side of it And as long as something dragged across the side a little bit, you can make the gun go off. Unlike these, with the trigger shoe safety in the center, you can see it's just that little piece that gets up and out of the way, and that allows the trigger shoe to go back. Once it gets back to the wall, you can hear the sear disengage. That's the little snap as the firing pin goes forward. That's how these guns work. This also has a firing pin safety. This also has a firing pin safety. This also has a firing pin safety. Over here it's called a striker safety. It's all the same crap. But those are irrelevant unless the sear fails. Like this, the sear could fail and allow the hammer to strike the firing pin, and as long as you didn't pull the trigger, the firing pin safety engages. But unless this hammer falls, the firing pin safety, the striker safety is irrelevant in every one of those scenarios. That is the most likely reason why the P320 is having negligent discharges more often than everything else, because SIG decided to be super bougie and they decided to not put a trigger shoe safety inside of there. Glock specifically has a trigger shoe safety design that is very uncomfortable to shoot for long periods. It protrudes all the time. Something like this Smith & Wesson has a very comfortable trigger shoe safety. It's a little bit larger and flat, and then when you depress it, it's a flat surface with the rest of the trigger. Same thing with the Walther PDP. It is much more comfortable to shoot for longer periods because it depresses all the way in and you don't actually feel it. I don't own a Glock to show you that at the moment. I don't really like them, but for one of those reasons is that the trigger shoe safety will dig into your finger under prolonged periods of firing. You know, you're firing 2, 3, 4, 500 rounds in a day, and then it just digs at your trigger finger. This gun, however, doesn't need that because it has the manual safety. This P320 is essentially, functionally, the exact same thing as carrying a 1911 cocked and unlocked, so that anything that touches the trigger shoe safety can make the gun go off. You would never see someone recommend you carrying a 1911 cocked and unlocked. It's always cocked and locked. That's it, guys. That's all it is. The chances that this gun has a physical defect that's allowing it to just sit there and when you drop it, it goes off on its own is highly unlikely. There's currently no evidence to suggest that. If at any point someone does find evidence to suggest this, I would rescind my hypothesis immediately and just be like, yeah, the gun's crap, it's designed like crap. But as of right now, this gun isn't designed to functionally fail. It's designed to allow people to negligently handle it way more easily than everything else. I used to be a huge fanboy for the P320. I lost all faith in it and SIG in general from getting defective SIG products. So it is certainly possible that Sig Sauer is having a defective issue with the 320. It's just there is no evidence upon all organizations, agencies, and all the lawsuits, all the testing. No one's been able to get this thing to fire without pulling the trigger. So that's all the evidence you have right now, and that is my leading hypothesis. If they were not so bougie and trying to be different and put a trigger shoe safety on this, like all these other striker fired guns have on the market, the original drop safe issue would have never been an issue. The original drop safe issue being that the trigger shoe was too heavy, and when it was dropped at this degree, the momentum allowed the trigger shoe to go back and pull its own self just from momentum. So then they changed to this much lighter, hollow trigger shoe, and that's why the P320s fired on their own. And it's that alone. As soon as one went off without someone meaning to do it, This gun's entire legacy was destroyed. And at this point, this product, whether or not it's physically defective, is now defective. And the other huge issue that's going on right now is a really big issue with the gun community in particular, and that's going to be tribalism and the law of primacy. So the first thing that people heard was the 320 is going off on its own, and they saw all these videos where, look, it's going off in this holster, and it went off in this bag, and all this stuff. And it's like when people believe in Bigfoot and aliens and ghosts. Like, they see a video of it and they're like, oh my god, that has to be true. And the first thing that they hear is the thing they believe the most. And it's very difficult to get someone to believe something other than what their first inclination was to begin with. It takes way more evidence to undo a thought than it does to create the initial thought. And that also is because people don't like being wrong, and if they change their opinion, that means that they're admitting that they were wrong, even though they should have no stakes in this whatsoever. But that's what's going on with the 320, especially. You hear that all the time, is they're like, oh, look at all these videos proving that it can go off on its own, when there actually is no proof that it can go off on its own. It's like if you accuse someone falsely of a crime that they didn't commit, but everyone hears that they committed this crime, that's it. Their reputation's over. They're gonna have to scrap this gun probably entirely, because I don't think anything is going to bring back the reputation of the 320 and allow people to trust it anymore, especially when you have guns like the PDP that are just phenomenal in every way. And they don't have this issue. Adding a trigger shoe safety does literally nothing to hinder the performance and handling characteristics of this gun, so there was no reason to not put one in there in the first place. That's the whole story, boys.